My dad turned to drink and criticized Mom after her brother cheated us, causing us to lose land. I am Mary, a sophomore in college, and my life today feels like a shadow of what it once was. Just a few years ago, my family embodied the warmth and joy that I believed would always define us. My father, a robust man with an infectious laugh, was the kind of dad who would spend hours in the garden, teaching me and my younger brother, Alex, the names of all the flowers and how to take care of them. My mother, a gentle soul with eyes that seemed to hold endless kindness, made our small cozy house a home with her loving touch and the heavenly smell of her cooking. Back then the future seemed bright. Our little family was tight-knit, bound by love and shared dreams, especially after my parents managed to buy a hectare of land from my uncle, my mother's brother. That land was more than just soil and greenery, it represented a legacy, a future where our family could build and grow, both literally and metaphorically. We envisioned a small family farm, maybe a few rental cottages that could nestle in the shade of the large oak trees dotting the landscape. It was a symbol of stability and hope, a tangible piece of prosperity that promised to anchor our family for generations. My Uncle James, my mother's younger brother, had always been a charismatic and persuasive figure. Growing up, I saw him as a fun-loving uncle who seemed to breeze through life, always with a ready joke or a small gift for me and Alex. He was a frequent visitor in our home, his arrival often heralding impromptu barbecues and late-night storytelling sessions. My mother adored him. She often spoke of their childhood adventures with a fondness and nostalgia that painted my uncle as not just a sibling but a hero in her eyes. This deep familial bond made him more than just an uncle to us. He was an integral part of our family fabric. My parents, especially my mother, trusted him implicitly. This trust was rooted in decades of shared history and mutual support. When Uncle James spoke, his words carried the weight of sincerity. Or so we believed. In hindsight, the signs of his financial instability were there, but they were subtle, overshadowed by his charm and our trust. He mentioned struggles now and then, hints about the economy, bad investments, the rising costs of living, but they were always presented as temporary setbacks. Nothing a good next move couldn't fix. So when Uncle James offered to sell a hectare of his land to my parents in 2013, it seemed like a golden opportunity. The land was located on the outskirts of our town, a lush expanse of green that bordered a small forest. My parents had always dreamed of owning more land, perhaps starting a small organic farm or building a few holiday cottages to rent out. The land my uncle offered seemed perfect for such dreams. The deal was straightforward, or so it seemed. Uncle James explained that he was selling the land because he needed liquidity to fund my cousin's college education. He painted a vivid picture. The land, once developed, could be the foundation of our family's financial security. My parents, eager to invest in our future and to help my uncle, agreed to buy it. The price was reasonable, the terms favorable, and the paperwork appeared to be in order, except for one detail. The Red Book, the official document proving land ownership, was still under the bank's hold due to a small loan my uncle had taken out. With reassurances from Uncle James that the loan would be cleared within a year, my parents proceeded. He crafted a promissory note, a casual yet seemingly earnest document, wherein he vowed to clear the debt and transfer the Red Book to my parents as soon as possible. Trusting him, they paid him the money, believing that the formalities were just a formality. Months turned into a year, and the promised Red Book did not materialize. My parents grew anxious, but each inquiry was met with reassurances and new promises from Uncle James. He always had a reason for the delay: paperwork snafus, bank errors, bureaucratic red tape. But his charm and our family's trust in him kept my parents from pressing too hard. This pattern continued until late 2018. That was when everything changed. The financial bubble that Uncle James had been inflating burst with shocking consequences. It turned out that the initial loan against the land was just the tip of an iceberg. Uncle James had been drowning in debt, far more than he had disclosed. In a desperate move, he had taken out further loans against the land, each one a deeper cut into the trust my parents had placed in him. The final blow came abruptly. Uncle James declared bankruptcy, and within weeks, we learned that he had fled the country. The news was delivered by a bank representative who arrived one crisp autumn morning to place foreclosure signs around the hectare that we thought was ours. The bank explained that the land was heavily mortgaged, far beyond its worth, and would be seized to cover my uncle's debts. The revelation shattered my parents. The betrayal by someone they had trusted so deeply was a wound that went beyond financial loss. My father particularly felt deceived and humiliated. He had advocated for the deal, swayed by my mother's trust in her brother and by the dreams they had harbored for that piece of land. The loss was not just a plot of earth, it was a future they had envisioned and promised to us. As the legal realities settled in, so did the bitterness. My father's sense of betrayal morphed into a festering anger that found its easiest outlet in my mother, who, despite being a victim herself, bore the brunt of his accusations and grief. The man who had once been the life of our family gatherings was now a source of tension and despair. In this new, harsh light, every memory of Uncle James was recast. The laughter and gifts, once signs of his generosity, now seemed part of a facade that hid his deceit. His stories, once enchanting, now felt like manipulations. The trust that had once bound our family to him had turned into a chain that dragged us down into a mire of betrayal and regret. The descent into despair was gradual at first, like the slow setting of the sun before darkness fully takes hold. My father, once a pillar of strength and joy in our household, succumbed to the weight of his disillusionment. His days began and ended with the bitter tang of alcohol, the bottles accumulating like silent markers of his decline. He no longer tended to his business, a small landscaping company that had flourished due to his love for nature and his dedication to his craft. Instead, he let calls go unanswered, projects unfinished, and slowly, the vibrant man who had raised me with laughter and lessons in resilience, succumbed to a listless apathy. It was not just the loss of the land that broke him, but the betrayal by his own brother-in-law, and the crushing responsibility of having convinced my mother to trust her brother. In his eyes, his failure was twofold. Not only had he failed to protect our financial future, but he had also placed his faith in a man who destroyed us. This sense of failure consumed him, leading him to relinquish all his hard work as if in surrender to an unseen foe. He wandered through his days like a ghost, his presence marked more by the trail of empty bottles than by any interaction with us. My mother bore the brunt of this transformation. The sharp edge of my father's tongue turned against her in his darkest moments. He accused her of complicity, of knowing her brother's intentions and yet leading us into ruin. His words were like daggers, and they sliced through the fabric of her self-worth every day. "Your family is a bunch of scammers," he would shout, the alcohol fueling his anger, turning it into a wildfire that consumed any remnants of peace within our home. Despite the onslaught, my mother's resilience was something to behold. She absorbed the verbal blows with a kind of stoic grace, her eyes often wet with unshed tears, but her posture remained unbroken. She became the buffer between my father's wrath and the rest of us, especially for Alex, my younger brother, who was just entering his teenage years amidst our family's crisis. Alex's rebellion against the situation was fierce and protective. He could not bear to see our mother demeaned and insulted. His confrontations with our father began as verbal skirmishes, challenging the unfairness of his accusations, defending our mother's honor with a boldness that both scared and awed me. "Stop blaming Mom, she didn't do anything wrong," he would yell back, his young voice cracking under the strain of his emotions. These clashes often escalated until the house felt like a battlefield, the air so thick with tension it was hard to breathe. Witnessing these exchanges tore at me. I was caught in a relentless storm of emotions, anger at my uncle for his deceit, despair over my father's downfall, and a deep gnawing pain for my mother's suffering. Each evening, as I heard my father's slurred accusations and my brother's desperate defenses, I felt a part of my heart crumble. The helplessness was overwhelming. I was a spectator in my own life, watching the people I loved tear each other apart. My mother, amidst this chaos, tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. She went about her daily routines, cooking meals that none of us had the heart to eat, cleaning a house that no longer felt like a home, and trying, always trying, to mediate between my father and brother. Her efforts were Herculean, and yet, I could see the toll it took on her. The circles under her eyes grew darker each day, her smiles more forced and fleeting. She often pulled me aside, her hands clutching mine with a desperation that was hidden from the others. "Take care of your studies, Mary. Don't worry about us," she would whisper, her voice trembling. But how could I not worry? How could I focus on college applications and exams when home was a place of war? The weight of her suffering became my constant companion. I lay awake at night, listening to the echoes of their arguments, and wondered how much more we could withstand. The fear of the phone ringing with news of something worse kept me on edge, a perpetual anxiety that gnawed at my concentration, my peace. In those moments when the house finally quieted down, I would find my mother in the living room, staring out the window. Sometimes I joined her, sitting in silence as we both lost ourselves in the world outside. It was during one of these silent vigils that she finally broke down and shared her deepest fears. "I'm scared, Mary," she confessed, her voice a whisper. "Scared that he'll never forgive me. Scared of losing you and Alex to this hatred." Her admission shattered the last barriers I had put up to protect myself. I realized then that my role wasn't just to be a bystander. I needed to be her ally, Alex's support, and perhaps, find a way to reach my father. But the path to healing seemed obscured by the thick fog of past mistakes and present pain. Life at home had become a landscape of suspicion and bitterness. My father's distrust had deepened to a point where even the simplest acts of familial kindness were scrutinized and tainted with accusations. My mother's occasional visits to her mother's house, or her attempts to maintain some semblance of connection with her parents through gifts or phone calls, were not spared from my father's critical eye. He saw these gestures not as acts of love but as betrayals. Further proof of conspiracies woven in his mind. One chilly afternoon, I returned from school to find the house unusually cold and quiet. My mother sat at the kitchen table, her face weary and lined with fresh worries. She looked up as I entered, managing a weak smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She had been to visit Grandma, who was unwell, and had brought her some homemade soup and a warm blanket. When my father had learned of this, he exploded in rage, accusing her of wasting our scarce resources on her family, whom he now viewed almost as enemies. "Doesn't matter what I do, it's always wrong in his eyes," she confided in me, her voice breaking. "But I can't just stop caring for my mom, Mary. I can't." The situation with the phone calls was even worse. Every ring stirred a palpable tension in the air. My father, often fueled by his drunken stupor, would accuse my mother of conspiring with her brother, my uncle, despite my uncle having disappeared years ago. He couldn't seem to grasp that no one in the family had heard from him since he fled, leaving us to deal with the fallout of his actions. Each call, no matter the caller, seemed to him a ghostly echo of past betrayals, a reminder of the trust that had been broken and the financial security that had been stolen from us. Despite these overwhelming pressures, my mother continued to shoulder the responsibility of not just trying to keep our family together, but also ensuring that my two sisters and I could continue our education. My sisters, both younger than me, were in high school, facing their own battles with the ripple effects of our family's crisis. The cost of education was a constant worry, but my mother was determined that the chaos at home would not derail our futures. Seeing her struggle, I made the decision to take on a part-time job alongside my studies. I was now a freshman at a local community college, having chosen a school close to home to reduce expenses and stay near my family. My days were a blend of classes, studying, and working late shifts at a nearby cafe. Every paycheck I received went partly to help out at home and partly to cover my own educational expenses. This dual role of student and financial contributor was exhausting. There were nights I came home so tired that I could barely make it through dinner before falling asleep over my textbooks. Yet, seeing my mother's quiet gratitude and the way she fought to keep us all moving forward gave me the strength to keep going. She managed our meager finances with a precision and care that was nothing short of heroic, stretching every dollar to cover not just school fees, but the basic necessities of life. Her resilience was our family's unsung melody, a quiet background score that pushed us all to persevere. My mother never complained about her lot, accepting each day's troubles with a resolve that was both heartbreaking and inspiring. Her love for us was an unspoken promise, a commitment that she lived out by enduring the harsh words and the colder silences from my father. My younger sisters, witnessing all this, grew in their own resilience. We became a team, albeit a silent one, finding comfort in shared glances and quiet conversations away from the storms that frequently brewed in our living room. We helped each other with homework, shared responsibilities around the house, and saved little surprises for our mother. Like the time we all chipped in to buy her a new book by her favorite author, hiding it under her pillow to find after a particularly hard day. In these moments, we found our pockets of peace, small oases of normalcy in a desert of chaos. My father's outbursts and suspicions became the storms we learned to weather, building stronger shelters in our bonds with each other. Each challenge, while painful, forged us into more than just siblings and a mother. It made us allies in a struggle that none of us had chosen but all of us were determined to survive. As I lay in bed each night, listening to the faint sounds of the house settling, I thought about my mother's sacrifices and my father's pain. The journey was far from easy, and many days, the burden of what we were enduring seemed too much to bear. But in the strength of my mother's unwavering love and the shared resolve of my sisters, I found a flicker of hope that perhaps, someday, we might find a way through the darkness, back to a place where love and trust could bloom once more in our family garden. It was a typical Thursday afternoon, the cafe bustling with the usual crowd of students and local professionals grabbing their midday coffee fix. As a waiter, I navigated through the tables with practiced ease, balancing trays filled with steaming beverages and the cafe's signature pastries. The hum of conversations mixed with the clatter of cups created a familiar soundtrack to my shifts. It was amidst this cacophony that I caught a glimpse of something, or rather someone, that froze me in my tracks. From the corner of my eye, I noticed a figure outside the large front window, a silhouette that was hauntingly familiar. The posture, the way he carried himself, it was unmistakably reminiscent of someone I had hoped to forget. My heart skipped a beat as I told myself it couldn't possibly be him. My uncle, the man responsible for so much of my family's misery, had reportedly fled abroad, a cowardly escape from the financial and emotional wreckage he had caused. Surely I was mistaken. But as the figure approached and entered through the cafe's front door, The reality of his identity became undeniable. It was indeed my uncle. The shock of seeing him there, in flesh and blood, after all the rumors of his departure overseas, left me rooted to the spot. Time seemed to slow as he casually strolled up to the counter, oblivious to the storm of emotions his presence had stirred in me. Dressed incongruously in a crisply tailored suit that seemed to mock the ruin he had left behind, he appeared not only unscathed by the ordeal, but prosperous. The fabric of his coat was fine, clearly expensive, with a sheen that caught the light as he moved. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, and he wore a watch that glinted under the cafe's overhead lights, a stark contrast to the image of a bankrupt fugitive. As he ordered his coffee, chatting amiably with my co-worker, a surge of anger welled up inside me. Here was the man who had betrayed his own sister, my mother, leaving her to shoulder the burden of his deceit. Her life had become a daily struggle to maintain some semblance of normalcy for us, her children, while he seemingly enjoyed the freedom purchased at our expense. My hands trembled slightly as I took in the sight of him, so at ease, so removed from the consequences of his actions. How could he stroll into my workplace, a place just a stone's throw from the school where I studied and worked to support my family because of the financial mess he had created? The unfairness of it all, the injustice, burned through me. I felt profound sorrow for my mother. She had aged visibly in the past few years, each day etching more lines of worry and exhaustion onto her face. Her nights were restless, often spent in tearful worry, her dreams haunted by the fallout of trusting her brother. And here he was, dressed in a suit that likely cost more than what she could spare on groceries in a month. As my uncle took a seat with his coffee, I wrestled with what to do next. Confronting him was my first instinct. To unleash the pent-up frustration, to tell him about the suffering his actions had continued to cause. Yet, as I watched him, a middle-aged man enjoying his coffee, seemingly content with his world, doubt crept in. What could a confrontation realistically achieve? After a few moments of internal debate, I approached his table, my resolve firming with each step. "Uncle James," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. He looked up, his expression one of mild surprise that shifted quickly to recognition. And fleetingly, something that might have been guilt. "Mary," he replied, his tone cautious. "It's been a long time. You've grown." "Yes," I said, the words tasting bitter. "A lot has changed since you left." We talked then, or rather, I spoke while he listened. I told him about the hardships we faced, about my father's decline, and my mother's silent resilience. I spoke of the responsibilities that had fallen onto my shoulders far too early, the dreams that had to be adjusted, and the family fabric that had been torn apart. He offered explanations, some semblance of regret, though whether it was genuine or not, I couldn't say. He spoke of bad luck and worse choices, of his own losses and regrets. But no apology could undo the damage, no words could reclaim the years of pain and hardship his deceit had wrought upon us. The conversation ended with no dramatic resolution, no promises of restitution. He left, and I returned to my duties, the encounter leaving a mix of sadness and catharsis. I hadn't changed anything, not really. But speaking my truth had lightened something within me. The afternoon had taken a turn I could never have anticipated. After meeting with my uncle at the cafe, I returned home filled with a mix of emotions. It felt important to share the encounter with my mother, to relay not just his words but the sheer normalcy with which he had presented himself. My mother listened quietly, her expression somber, absorbing every detail with a heavy heart. As I spoke, her eyes reflected a deep sadness, a well of emotions that seemed too vast and complex for words. She was silent for a long time, the air between us filled with unspoken thoughts and lingering heartache. It was a silence that spoke volumes, resonating with the weight of all we had endured, all that had been broken and lost because of my uncle's actions. Suddenly, the fragile quiet was shattered by a loud, angry voice. My father, who had been out of sight but not out of earshot, stormed into the room. His face was flushed with anger, his eyes alight with the kind of fiery intensity that had become all too familiar. He had overheard everything, and the information acted like fuel on the already burning fire of his resentment. Without a moment's hesitation, he launched into a tirade. The words were harsh and unforgiving, aimed indiscriminately at my mother, my uncle, and all her relatives. He accused them once again of conspiracy and betrayal, his voice rising to a crescendo of fury and frustration. The pain and bitterness he felt towards my uncle were now tangled with a renewed sense of betrayal, knowing that my uncle was back and living seemingly without consequence. In his rage, he turned towards a shelf in our living room, one that held various family dishes and heirlooms, and began to smash them one by one onto the floor. The sound of shattering porcelain filled the room, each crash a hammer blow to the already fragile peace of our household. My mother's face crumpled in despair at the sight, her hands trembling as she covered her mouth to stifle her sobs. I stood frozen for a moment, shocked and scared by the intensity of my father's outburst. The room felt smaller somehow, as if each broken piece of dishware was a fragment of our family's unity, irretrievably damaged. Amidst the chaos I found my voice, albeit shaky, and tried to intervene. "Dad, please stop. This isn't helping anything," I pleaded, my own voice edged with desperation. But my words seemed to fuel his anger further. He turned his wrath towards me, accusing me of siding with traitors, and questioning my loyalty to our family. The accusations were like slaps to the face, harsh and stinging. I struggled to maintain my composure, to stand strong in the face of the storm. My mother, amidst her tears, tried to calm him, reaching out to touch his arm in a plea for peace. But he was beyond consolation, caught up in his own spiral of anger and hurt. The situation escalated until, finally, exhausted and spent, he left the room, leaving behind a trail of emotional and physical wreckage. The aftermath was a heavy silence, the air thick with the scent of dust and broken porcelain. My mother sank into a chair, her body racked with quiet sobs. I moved to her side, wrapping my arms around her in a silent offer of comfort and solidarity. Together, we mourned not just the dishes or even the peace of our afternoon, but something deeper. The loss of what our family had once been, the easy love and trust that had seemed unbreakable. In that moment of shared grief, my thoughts turned anxiously towards my younger brother Alex. Known for his fiery temper and fierce protectiveness of our mother, I prayed he would stay away until the storm had passed. The last thing we needed was for him to come home and confront our father in his current state. The potential for violence was too great, the stakes too high. I didn't want this family conflict to escalate into something even more destructive. As we sat there, my mother and I, in the quiet aftermath, a profound sadness settled over me. It was a sadness for her, for all she had to endure. For my father, lost to his bitterness, and for Alex, who should have been spared from adult conflicts. I felt an overwhelming urge to protect them all, to somehow mend the fractures that had splintered through our family's foundation. But as I held my mother, feeling the tremble of her sobs, I knew that some things were beyond my ability to repair. The damage was done, the scars too deep. All I could do was offer my support, my love, and my presence, and hope that somehow, it would be enough to help us navigate through the wreckage of our shared past into a future that, despite everything, I still hoped could hold some measure of peace and reconciliation. The morning after the turmoil at home, I found myself at the coffee shop, mechanically performing my duties but with my mind elsewhere. The image of my father's wrathful destruction and my mother's silent tears haunted me, playing over in my mind like a nightmarish loop. Despite the busy morning rush, a part of me remained disengaged, distant. It was during this haze of distraction that I noticed a familiar figure through the shop's window. My father was outside, walking back and forth along the street, his eyes scanning the faces of passers-by. Unlike his usual disheveled appearance marked by the telltale signs of his drunken escapades, today he was sober, his movements deliberate. The stark difference in his demeanor piqued my curiosity and concern. It wasn't long before I realized he was probably looking for my uncle, the man who had set off the chain of events that had led our family to this precipice. Compelled by a mix of worry and a desperate need to understand, I asked my manager if I could leave work early. Once outside, I kept a cautious distance, trailing behind my father as he continued his seemingly aimless search. After some time, he stopped at a small convenience store to buy a bottle of water. With the bottle in hand, he walked to a quieter part of the street, away from the bustling crowd. There he squatted down and took a swig of water. It was then that I saw a vulnerability in him that I had never witnessed before, 2 lines of tears streaming down his face. Watching him at that moment, I felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Just the day before, he had been a tempest, a force of anger and destruction. Now, he seemed diminished, broken, crying like a child lost in a world too harsh and unforgiving. The sight of his tears, so raw and exposed, stirred in me a profound sadness. I wondered about the immense burden he must be carrying, the sheer weight of betrayal from a family member he had trusted implicitly. I didn't approach him. Instead, I turned away, allowing him his moment of private sorrow, and started the walk home, my own tears blurring my vision as I grappled with the pain of our fractured family. What had we done to deserve such a fate? The question echoed in my mind, each step towards home heavy with the gravity of our collective heartache. On impulse, I decided to take a detour to my grandmother's house. I needed a respite. A moment to gather strength from someone who might understand the depth of what we were facing. My grandmother welcomed me with her usual warmth, her keen eyes quick to see the distress in mine. As we sat together, I shared the events of the past few days, and in turn, she offered me insights into my father that I had not fully appreciated before. She spoke of the land, the piece of earth that had promised so much hope and potential. For my father, that land was not merely an investment, It was a testament to his dedication to providing for his family, a tangible representation of his love and commitment to our future. He had poured not just his money, but his dreams into that soil, dreams of security and prosperity for my sisters and me. It was supposed to be our legacy, a stable and secure foundation upon which we could build our lives. Your father has always wanted the best for you girls, my grandmother said, her voice tinged with emotion. He saw that land as a way to ensure you all had opportunities he never had. Losing it, especially the way we did, broke him more than you might realize. Her words shed light on the depth of my father's despair. It wasn't just anger or betrayal that fueled his actions. It was a profound sense of loss, not only of the land but of his role as our provider, of his identity as the man of the house. The loss had unmoored him, and what we saw, the rage, the helplessness, was his struggle to grapple with this new reality. As I listened to my grandmother, I felt a renewed sense of empathy for my father. Understanding the magnitude of his hopes and how deeply he felt their collapse helped me see past the fury and the broken dishes. It didn't excuse his actions, but it helped explain them, framing his outbursts as cries of pain rather than expressions of inherent cruelty. In the midst of our family's turmoil, as I watched the strain and sadness inflicted upon us by my uncle's deceit and my father's subsequent unraveling, I often found myself wrestling with conflicting emotions about what paths my mother should take. There were moments, many moments, when I felt that the only solution for her, and perhaps for all of us, was to sever ties with my father. The man who once filled our home with laughter and security had become a source of pain and instability. It seemed logical, perhaps even necessary, for her to consider divorce as a viable path to peace. Yet despite my suggestions and perhaps even pleas, my mother never took that step. For a long time, I couldn't understand her decision. To me, it looked like an endless cycle of suffering. My father's bitterness and accusations, his thunderous outbursts that shattered more than just the physical tranquility of our home. It all seemed like too much for any one person to bear, especially someone as gentle as my mother. But as time wore on, and I witnessed more of the complexities of human emotions and the deep-seated bonds of marriage, I began to grasp the possible layers of her choice. My mother, with her enduring patience and almost unfathomable strength, perhaps saw beyond the surface of my father's wrath. Beneath his stormy veneer and the alcohol-fueled tirades, there was another man. A man she had loved and chosen to share her life with. A man who had once been the anchor of our family. She understood the depth of his despair, not just at the financial ruin that had befallen us, but at the profound sense of betrayal by his own brother-in-law, a man he had trusted implicitly. This betrayal had not just robbed him of a piece of land. It had robbed him of his dreams for our family's future, of his pride in providing for us, and of his mental peace. Understanding this, my mother likely felt that abandoning my father in his darkest hour would only add to the tragedy of our situation. Her commitment then, was not just to the man he had become but to the man he once was and, perhaps, could be again. It was a choice of compassion over condemnation, of hope over despair. As for my uncle, the architect of our misfortune, my feelings were far less forgiving. The more I pondered on the devastation he had caused, the more a part of me wished him ill. It was a dark thought, and it shamed me at times. Wishing death upon another person, especially a family member, was a heavy, terrible thing. But in my lowest moments, it seemed a fitting end for someone who had so selfishly dismantled the happiness of his own relatives for his gain. Uncle James had not just stolen money. He had stolen our security, our joy, and our ability to look towards the future with hope rather than despair. The fact that he continued to live comfortably, seemingly indifferent to the chaos he had left in his wake, fueled a bitter fire within me. I imagined him facing some form of cosmic justice, where he would finally understand the full weight of the pain he had caused. Leaving my grandmother's house, I felt fortified by a mixture of love and sorrow. The road to healing our family would be long and uncertain, but armed with this new understanding, I felt slightly better equipped to face the challenges ahead. My father's tears and the wreckage at home were not just signs of what we had lost, but also markers of where we needed to begin rebuilding. As I approached our house, the sight of it no longer filled me with dread, but with a resolve. We were broken, yes, but not beyond repair. With each step, I was making a silent vow to myself and to my family. I would not let our story end here, not in anger and despair. Somehow, we would find a way through the pain, guided by the understanding and love that still lingered beneath the scars, waiting to be rediscovered and nurtured back to life. My ex came out as a lesbian right before our wedding date. She then lied to everyone, and now they have all abandoned me. My ex came out as a lesbian right before our wedding date. She then lied to everyone, and now they have all abandoned me. It had been 7 solid years with Dana, and from the get-go, she was open about her bisexuality. She'd shared stories about her past relationships with women before we became serious, and honestly, it never bothered me. It felt good, having that kind of honesty between us right from the start. Our relationship was never about fireworks or drama. It was more like a steady flame. Sure, we had our share of disagreements, like her habit of leaving dishes in the sink or my tendency to work late without giving a heads up. But we always found our way back, talking things through over late-night cups of coffee or early morning walks in the park near our apartment. Living together brought its own rhythm to our lives. We fell into comfortable routines, like how every Saturday morning we'd hit the local farmer's market, Dana beelining it to the fresh-cut flowers and me always picking up an extra loaf of sourdough from the baker. Evenings often found us in our little kitchen, Dana trying out new vegan recipes she'd found online while I played taste tester, or both of us curled up on the couch, binging on our latest Netflix obsession or deep diving into playlists of newly discovered bands. Our relationship might not have been the stuff of grand romances, but it was real. It was the small moments, the quiet understanding, the shared smiles over inside jokes that nobody else got. It was in these moments that I saw a future with her, a lifetime of these small perfect snapshots. And after 7 years, it felt right to take the next step, to ask her to marry me, to officially build a life together. This wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment decision, it was one built on countless little moments that told me we were right for each other. After 7 years together, everything just seemed to line up perfectly. We were solid, emotionally and financially. We'd built a life together in our cozy 2-bedroom apartment surrounded by plants Dana loved to care for and framed photos capturing our best moments. It felt like everything we did naturally synced, whether it was saving up for a dream vacation or just planning our weekly meals. We were a team, and I never doubted we were on the same track. So, deciding to propose felt like the most natural next step. I wanted everything to be perfect, to reflect the thoughtfulness and depth of our relationship. It took weeks of planning, selecting the right ring, a simple yet elegant band that I knew would suit her understated style, choosing the perfect day, and orchestrating a scenario that was intimate and personal. I chose the little art gallery where we had our first date, under the guise of a new exhibit I knew she wouldn't want to miss. The gallery was small and intimate, filled with soft lighting and the gentle hum of other visitors that gave it a lively yet private feel. As we walked through, discussing various pieces, my heart pounded with a mix of nerves and excitement. At the center of the gallery, beneath her favorite painting, a vibrant abstract piece that always seemed to ignite her passion for art, I stopped. The moment felt suspended in time as I reached into my pocket, feeling the cool metal of the ring box. I got down on one knee, and her hands flew to her mouth in surprise. "Will you marry me?" The words felt both monumental and terrifyingly fragile in the air between us. Her eyes, always so full of warmth and understanding, widened as she hesitated. That moment of hesitation felt like an eternity, stretching out painfully long. I could see the conflict pass through her gaze, and my heart sank a little with uncertainty. But then, softly, almost a whisper, she said, "Yes." The glow of our engagement should have filled those next few days with joy and excited planning. In many ways, it did. Our friends were ecstatic, their faces lighting up as they tossed around ideas for the wedding. Beachside ceremonies, rustic barn venues, even a destination wedding in Italy. The enthusiasm was contagious, and it carried me along for a while. But something nagged at me, an undercurrent of unease that I just couldn't shake. It started with Dana's hesitation. That moment, as brief as it was, planted a seed of doubt in my mind. Why did she hesitate? I couldn't help but ask her later that evening as we lay in bed, the light from the street lamps casting soft shadows across our room. "I was nervous," she said simply, her voice steady but her body tense beside me. I wanted to believe her, to write it off as pre-proposal jitters, but it felt like there was something more she wasn't saying. I pushed a little, but she shut down the conversation with a kiss and whispered, "Let's just enjoy this moment." So, I let it go, not wanting to spoil the brief peace we had. But then there were her parents. We visited them the next day to share our news. I expected joy, or at least a warm embrace of congratulations. Instead, I was met with strained smiles and hesitant congratulations. Her father's pat on my back was a bit too forceful, and her mother's eyes darted away too quickly when our gaze met. They were acting, putting on a show of happiness, but their eyes didn't match their expressions. This was not the reaction I expected from the people who should have been overjoyed for their daughter. Their odd behavior only added layers to my unease. Why would they fake their happiness? What was making them hold back? The questions multiplied, swirling in my mind. I tried talking to Dana about it, pointing out how off her parents seemed. "They're just surprised, that's all. They'll come around," she said, brushing it off too quickly, too easily. Our friends' reactions stood in stark contrast. They were genuinely thrilled, already diving into planning and celebrations. Their genuine excitement was a relief, but it also made the falseness of her parents' reactions even more stark and troubling. It felt like I was living in two realities. One where our engagement was the best news ever, and another shadowed by hidden truths and half-hearted congratulations. The mixture of reactions left me feeling off balance. I was caught between the joy of our friends and the unsettling response from her parents. It should have been one of the happiest times of our lives, but instead, I found myself looking for clues, for any sign of what was really going on beneath the surface. But then, that day came. A day that seemed no different from any other. I walked through our front door after a long day at work. Only instead of finding Dana in the kitchen or curled up on the sofa with a book as I would on any other day, she was standing by the door, her posture tense, a suitcase at her feet. My heart sank at the sight. "What's going on, Dana?" I asked, my voice steady despite the dread beginning to curl inside me. Dana looked at me, her eyes not holding the warmth I was used to but a somber resolve instead. "Listen, I know this is going to be hard for you," she started, her voice trembling slightly. "But I'm not bisexual. I'm lesbian." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and cold. My parents knew this for 2 years, and this is why they weren't happy and were faking it. "Please, I beg you, do not make this difficult. Just let me leave. Don't cry. Don't beg. And don't scream. Let's just let things go like adults," she continued, her voice growing firmer with each word. I stood there, frozen, as she picked up her bag and walked past me, not once looking back. The front door closed with a click that echoed through the empty apartment. The silence was suffocating. I didn't move, didn't call out to her. I couldn't. The shock pinned me in place, my mind racing yet blank, unable to process the sudden void Dana left in her wake. For what felt like an eternity, I stood there, grappling with a torrent of emotions. Betrayal, confusion, heartache, each one hit me harder than the last. How could the person I loved, the person I was about to marry, keep something like this from me? How could she leave so suddenly, so coldly, as if our years together meant nothing? Dana, the woman I thought I knew, the woman I planned a life with, had vanished, leaving behind a stranger with her face. The realization was brutal, a sharp pain that felt both numbing and searing at the same time. As the minutes ticked by, the initial shock slowly morphed into a profound sense of loss. The future we had envisioned together, our shared dreams and plans, dissolved right before my eyes. 3 months had crawled by since Dana left. During these months, not a single text, call, or knock on the door came. It was as if I had vanished from the lives of those I considered close. Dana had blocked me the very day she left, and her parents, who once welcomed me into their home, didn't bother to reach out. Our friends, mutual and otherwise, remained silent. Their social media posts were filled with praise for Dana, celebrating her bravery and authenticity. Each post was a dagger, reminding me of my own isolation. My health deteriorated rapidly. The stress and emotional turmoil manifested physically. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I was hospitalized 3 times in those 3 months. Each visit was a blur of IV drips, sympathetic nurses, and doctors advising me to take it easy, as if my body's betrayal was something I could moderate with a bit of rest. The concern of the hospital staff only highlighted the indifference from those I used to call friends and family. It was a stark, painful contrast to the emptiness of my phone's notifications. Work became my only routine, the only thing that kept me anchored to some semblance of normality. I'd drag myself there in the mornings, the tasks a welcome distraction, but leaving only to return to an empty home, where the quiet was suffocating. Meanwhile, Dana's journey was public, her narrative one of overcoming and authenticity. I couldn't escape it. Every time I logged online, there it was, the story of how she had finally found herself. The world praised her, admired her courage, while I became a ghost in my own life, unseen and unmissed. It wasn't just the breakup that hurt, it was the total abandonment, the erasure of my existence from the lives of those I loved. Right now, the anger seems too heavy to carry, too dense to ignite. I'm just floored by the disbelief, how swiftly my world turned upside down, and how everyone I thought I could lean on simply vanished. I wander through my apartment now. It's all a painful reminder of what was and what can never be again. And it's not just the breakup. It's the total silence from everyone else. Not a single call or message asking if I'm okay. It's as if I ceased to exist, as if my pain is less valid, less important. It's all about her. Her courage. Her journey. Her authenticity. You know what? Pluck them all. They showed their true colors, alright. They're all in awe of her, while I'm shattered here, ignored, like I meant nothing. And pluck my ex for painting this picture, for leaving me stranded in the wake of her self-discovery, without a second thought. I've tried to wrap my head around it, tried to find some sliver of understanding or closure. But there's none. Just this raw, gnawing emptiness where trust and love used to live. I trusted her with my heart, my future. And our friends, I thought they were our friends, but turns out, I was just a +1, easily uninvited when the narrative didn't need me anymore. So yeah, I'm beyond angry. I'm just lost, stripped of my role in my own life story, wondering if I ever really mattered at all. It's a hard pill to swallow, realizing that you might have always been the expendable one. But maybe this is the wake-up call I needed, a brutal shove out of naivety. From here on out, it's about finding my footing again, figuring out who I am when I'm not part of us. But as for them, they can keep their shallow concerns and their superficial celebrations. I'm done. Update. So here we go again, like in GTA San Andreas. But this time is more painful and shocking at the same time, cause today and yesterday night a lot happened. Like some of you folks said, somehow one of my ex-friends saw my post on TikTok and the absolute mess started and is still going on right now. It was late in the evening, just another night of me trying to distract myself with old movies and leftover takeout, when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in months, Paul. Seeing his name made my stomach twist. After everything, what could he possibly want? I answered hesitantly. Paul? Hey, he started, his voice awkward, unsure. I saw your post, the one where you mentioned Dana. And man, I didn't know. We didn't know. I tensed, bracing myself for what was coming. It felt like stepping back into a storm I thought had passed. Know what? I managed, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Paul sighed heavily on the other end. Dana told us all a different story, he admitted. She said when she came out to you, you lost it. Tried to hurt her, and then threatened her if she left. She made us promise not to reach out, told us you were dangerous. My breath caught in my throat. The accusations were like a punch to the gut. How could she say those things about me? My confusion and hurt must have been palpable because Paul quickly added. But man, after reading your post, we pressed her on it. She broke down and admitted that she lied about everything. She was scared, she said. Scared of losing us as friends if we knew the truth. The room felt suddenly colder, the shadows deeper. I slumped back against the sofa, the weight of months of isolation and betrayal hitting me all at once. So, you all believed her? Just like that? My voice was barely a whisper, a mix of disbelief and sorrow weaving through the words. Yeah, and I can't tell you how sorry I am. We should have reached out to you. Should have asked your side of things. We screwed up, big time. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of lost time and broken trust. The news that Dana had lied about such serious accusations was both a vindication and a new kind of heartbreak. Why would she do that? And why did everyone just believe her without a second thought about me? Paul's next words pulled me back from the edge of those spiraling thoughts. A bunch of us want to make it right, if you'll let us. As I hung up the phone, the screen dim now, the silence of the apartment felt a little less oppressive. The aftermath of Paul's call was like breaking the dam that had held back months of silence. The days following the revelation were a whirlwind of emotions and decisions. My phone, once a reminder of isolation, was now incessantly active with messages of regret and apologies from friends who had deserted me based on Dana's lies. Among these messages was one from Dana herself, begging for forgiveness and admitting her deceit had been driven by fear of losing her friends. It was a lot to process. The apologies from friends and Dana's confession, each unfolding in the glow of my phone's screen in the dimly lit corners of my once shared apartment. Then came the unexpected message from Mary, Dana's current girlfriend, who was blindsided by the whole situation. Her apology was mixed with confusion and hurt. She had known Dana for a year yet had only heard of me as a roommate. This detail stung sharply. It was disorienting to grasp just how extensively Dana had rewritten our shared past to fit her new narrative. The gravity of the deceit weighed heavily on me, and in a moment fueled by a mixture of hurt and the desire for some control over the chaos, I decided to confront the whole situation head-on. I created a new group chat, including Dana, Mary, Paul, and the rest of my friends who had been misled. The digital room felt charged with tension, a virtual stand-in for the confrontation that needed to happen. In the group, I laid it all out plainly. I'm not changing my mind about forgiving what happened, not yet, I started, the words stark against the backdrop of their previous silence. I've even considered legal action against Dana for defamation, I added, my statement partly true. The idea of suing her had flickered in my thoughts, not fully formed but a reflection of the deep hurt, and the drastic measures I felt pushed towards. I continued. If you all truly cared about me, wouldn't at least one of you have reached out to confirm the story? To ask my side? My words were not just a question but a mirror, reflecting back their own actions, or lack thereof. Then I shared more about Dana that I had kept private, Details that painted a fuller picture of the deceit. With each message sent, I felt a small release, a venting of months of pent-up frustration and sadness. After ensuring my peace was heard, I blocked them all. It was a drastic step, but necessary for me to start healing, to cut out the voices that had so easily believed the worst in me. The last few weeks have felt like being stuck in a relentless storm. No matter how many numbers I block, new texts and calls flood in. Friends, or who I thought were friends, are now strangers reaching out through different numbers, their words swinging between apologies and accusations, and even involving people I don't know to pass their messages. It's relentless and exhausting. Every buzz of my phone spikes my anxiety, turning what was once a simple ringtone into a trigger. It's unreal, the extent of this chaos. I keep telling myself this has to be some twisted nightmare, that no one actually lives through this kind of drama. But every new message, every unknown caller ID flashing on my phone screen, drags me back to the harsh reality that this is indeed my life now. It's all true, and there's no waking up from it. Today, I saw a therapist. I sat in a quiet, softly lit room that felt a million miles away from the turmoil of my life. It was supposed to be just about dealing with Dana's betrayal and the fallout with my friends, but it turned into so much more. Once I started talking, old wounds opened up. Wounds I hadn't even admitted were there. The deaths of my parents and my sister, events that I had boxed up and stored deep within, surfaced with overwhelming force. I cried. Not just a few tears, but deep heaving sobs that shook my whole body. I cried for everything that's happened, for everything I lost, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel alone with my pain. The therapist listened, her presence calm and accepting, a stark contrast to the judgment and betrayal I'd become accustomed to. Leaving her office, I felt drained but strangely lighter. It's clear to me now that this is just the beginning of a long journey, a journey to heal not just from the recent betrayals, but also from the grief I've carried for years, buried under layers of daily survival and distraction. I forgot to write this little part, but the quick resume is that I never had a good relationship with Dana's parents, so we never went along well because they always said that I wasn't the right guy for their daughter, so I never cared about them. But this time they asked me to think wisely, and to not sue Dana because she was afraid, and they even justified her actions. That's all, and in fact, I wasn't surprised about their reaction to the news of marrying her. A month has passed since my first post and here I'm again. I know that I promised to be here again when things would be better and I hoped for that very much, but unfortunately my life isn't better at all and things are always going worse than I expected. I'm gonna talk like I talk with my therapist cause a little bit you all are like my therapist, lol. Every session with the therapist peels back layers I didn't even know were there. I entered therapy with the hope, maybe naive, that a few sessions would set me right, that I'd find a way to quickly navigate through the emotional wreckage Dana left behind. But it's turning out to be more complex, more grueling than I'd ever imagined. I find myself sitting in the same soft chair each week, the room always quiet, except for the subtle ticking of the clock and the occasional sounds of the city that drift through the window. These sessions are my safe space, yet they challenge me deeply. As I talk through my days and recount the events that have unfolded, I realize how much I've bottled up, not just recently but over years. Decades even. I've started to cry, a lot. It's not just a tear or two, but a profound, shaking type of crying that comes from a place deep inside. I cry for my parents, who I lost too soon, and my little sister, whose laughter I can still hear if I let the silence linger long enough. I cry for what happened with Dana, how her deception cut so deep, and for my friends, who turned their backs when I needed them the most, treating me like an afterthought, not the person they had known for years. The therapist listens, her notes quiet, her nods encouraging, but the work is mine to do. Each session, each revelation, it feels like I'm trying to climb out of a deep well, the walls damp and mossy, my hands slipping every time I think I've found a new hold. It's frustrating, and sometimes, I leave feeling worse than when I entered. But there's also a glimmer of hope, an understanding that this is a process, and it's supposed to be hard. You're unpacking a lot of buried emotions, she tells me, her voice always steady. It's okay to feel overwhelmed. Healing isn't linear. These words have become a mantra for me on the hardest days. I know I'm not an expert at any of this. I can't neatly dissect my feelings or predict how long it will take to feel whole again. It's a journey without a clear map, filled with unexpected turns and setbacks. But I'm learning. About grief, about betrayal, about the strength it takes to rebuild trust, not just in others, but in myself. This isn't the quick fix I hoped for. It's slower, messier, more painful. Yet I cling to the moments of clarity, the small victories when I can talk about my sister without a breakdown, or when I can reflect on Dana's actions without feeling that deep, dark anger. After losing my parents and then my little sister, the world seemed to shrink down to a pinpoint of grief that was almost unbearable. When Dana came into my life, It was like a breath of fresh air sweeping through a long-sealed room. She became my focus, my future, someone to build a new kind of family with, a chance to start over and create a life filled with the happiness and stability I had lost so suddenly. I poured everything into our relationship. Every dinner cooked, every date night planned, every small surprise was a brick in the foundation of the new life I envisioned for us. I wanted her to feel loved, not just ordinarily loved, but deeply cherished. I made sure to listen to her dreams, support her ambitions, and be there whenever she needed someone to lean on. Dana wasn't just my partner. She was my confidant, the one person who really knew every facet of me. My vulnerabilities, my deepest fears, and my hopes. In my heart, Dana filled a space that had been hollowed out by loss. She was my soft spot, the person whose happiness became synonymous with my own. Over the years, this bond only deepened, rooted in countless shared moments and private jokes, the kind that weave two lives inseparably together. But what perhaps wasn't clear in everything I've shared before, is the depth of my commitment to her. Every plan for the future, every dream about what lay ahead included her. When I thought about where I wanted to be in 5, 10, or 20 years, it was always with Dana by my side. She wasn't just part of my life, she was central to every part of my vision for the future. This is why the betrayal cut so deeply, why it felt not just like a personal loss, but like losing a part of myself. When she left, it wasn't just a partner walking out the door. It was as if she took away the very essence of the family I had tried to rebuild. The promise of a new life, a new beginning that had once seemed so bright and certain, crumbled into uncertainty and disillusionment. Now, left in the wake of her departure, I grapple not only with the pain of her betrayal, but with the reality of being alone again, confronted with the echoes of past losses. It's a strange, hollow feeling to realize that the person you trusted with your deepest self, the person you believed would never hurt you, was the one who left the deepest cut. The journey to heal from this isn't just about moving past a broken relationship, it's about reconstructing my sense of trust and understanding what family and love mean to me now. Coming back from the army was like stepping into a different world. After years of structured days, where the stakes were life and death, the transition to civilian life felt disorienting, quiet and mundane. I was carrying more than just my duffel bag home. I had memories and traumas tucked away, the kind that don't just fade with time or can be left at the doorstep. It was during this turbulent phase of readjustment that I met Dana. She entered my life when the echoes of my military service were still loud in my mind, a time when I was trying to find who I was outside of a uniform. She saw past the facade I presented to the world, the decorated veteran with medals and a straight posture. Dana saw the vulnerabilities, the night terrors, the silent moments of reflection that consumed me. And rather than turning away, she stepped closer, choosing to understand and share the burden of my hidden battles. It was love at first sight, not just in the romantic sense but in a profound, life-altering way. Dana represented hope, a beacon in the fog of my transition. Her presence brought a sense of normalcy and peace that had eluded me since my return. I was enchanted, not just by her beauty but by her compassion and unwavering support. So yes, perhaps it was naive, but I believed in the fairy tale she represented. Dana was the one for me, the person who could make the concept of home feel real again, not just a place, but a state of being. In her, I saw the potential to rebuild the family I had lost, to create a future filled with laughter and love, a stark contrast to the solitude and solemnity of my past. That belief in our future was what fueled every decision, every sacrifice. I poured all of my hopes into our relationship, trusting that this was the path to a new beginning, to a life where the shadows of war and loss would be replaced by shared happiness and mutual growth. Each moment with her reinforced this dream, building up an image of what could be if we continued to walk this path together. Reflecting on the past year, I've come to realize that life doesn't always unfold as planned, and sometimes the most painful experiences carry the most profound lessons. Living through the whirlwind of betrayal, abandonment, and the subsequent journey of self-discovery has taught me more than any single moment of happiness ever could. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you. My wife has proposed a threesome with another girl. Would I be able to live with myself if I sacrificed my own values for the sake of keeping her by my side? Or would I refuse it? My name is Ash and I'm a 31-year-old man living in the bustling city. For the past 8 years I've been married to the love of my life, my wife, who is just a year older than me at 32. Our journey together has been filled with both highs and lows, but through it all, we've remained committed to each other, building a life filled with love, trust, and mutual respect. When I first met my wife, let's call her Sarah, it felt like destiny had brought us together. We shared a deep connection from the very beginning, and as our relationship blossomed, I knew she was the one I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. We got married after a few years of dating, surrounded by our friends and family, and embarked on the journey of marriage with excitement and anticipation. Our marriage has been a journey of growth and exploration, as we've navigated the challenges and joys of life together. We've supported each other through career changes, family struggles, and personal triumphs, always standing by each other's side no matter what. However, recently our relationship took an unexpected turn when Sarah proposed the idea of exploring our sexuality in a new way. It was a proposal that caught me off guard, to say the least. Sarah expressed her desire to introduce a third party into our bedroom, specifically another woman named Claire who had expressed interest in joining us. At first I was stunned by Sarah's proposition. It was something we had never discussed before, and the idea of bringing someone else into our intimate space felt daunting and unfamiliar. But as Sarah explained her thoughts and desires, I could see the excitement and anticipation in her eyes, and I knew she was serious about wanting to explore this new aspect of our relationship. Despite my initial reservations, I couldn't help but feel a sense of curiosity and intrigue. The idea of adding a new dimension to our sex life was both exciting and terrifying, and I found myself torn between my desire to please Sarah and my fears of the unknown. The conversation with Sarah about her proposition of a threesome was a whirlwind of emotions and thoughts swirling inside my head. Sitting across from her at our kitchen table, I couldn't help but feel a mix of surprise, curiosity, and apprehension as we delved into this uncharted territory. It all started one evening when Sarah broached the subject over dinner. As we savored our meal, she casually mentioned that she had been thinking about spicing up our sex life by inviting another woman to join us. At first I thought she was joking, but the earnest look in her eyes told me she was serious. I remember feeling a wave of shock wash over me as I processed her words. This was not a conversation I ever expected to have with my wife, and I struggled to wrap my head around the idea of sharing her with someone else. But as Sarah began to explain her perspective, I could see the excitement and anticipation bubbling within her. She spoke about her desire to explore her bisexual interests and her curiosity about adding a new dynamic to our relationship. She assured me that it was not about replacing me or seeking a polyamorous arrangement, but rather about enhancing our connection and experiencing something new together. Despite her reassurances, I couldn't shake the nagging doubts and concerns that lingered in the back of my mind. I worried about the potential complications and risks involved in inviting a third party into our intimate space. Would it change the dynamic between Sarah and me? Could it lead to jealousy or resentment down the line? Sarah sensed my hesitation and gently encouraged me to express my thoughts and feelings openly. She listened attentively as I voiced my concerns, patiently addressing each one with empathy and understanding. She reassured me that our relationship was strong enough to withstand any challenges that may arise and that she valued my happiness and comfort above all else. Deep down, I struggled to trust her intentions and questioned the true motives behind her proposal. In a moment of frustration and insecurity, I reacted harshly, my words laced with doubt and skepticism. I couldn't understand why she would want to jeopardize our marriage by introducing such a risky and potentially destructive element into our relationship. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios and I found myself lashing out in fear and anger. As the tension between us reached a boiling point, I made it clear that I was not comfortable with the idea of a threesome and that I would not entertain the notion any further. I couldn't bear the thought of sharing Sarah with another woman, and the mere suggestion of it filled me with a sense of betrayal and hurt. My own fears and insecurities clouded my judgment, leaving me unable to see beyond the immediate threat I perceived to our marriage. I recoiled from her touch, shutting her out as I retreated into my own turmoil. As the weight of my words hung heavy in the air, I realized the depth of the damage I had caused. My harsh reaction had pushed Sarah further away, widening the rift between us and deepening the divide in our marriage. As the conversation with Sarah reached its peak, with a tone that brooked no argument, she delivered chilling finality. Accept her proposal for a threesome, or risk losing her altogether. My heart sank as her words echoed in my mind, the weight of her ultimatum pressing down on me like a suffocating blanket. The thought of losing her, of watching our relationship crumble before my eyes, filled me with a sense of overwhelming dread. With a heavy heart I listened as Sarah outlined her terms. She offered me a mere 2 weeks to consider her proposal, a scant amount of time to grapple with the gravity of the decision before me. The pressure of her deadline bore down on me, leaving me feeling suffocated and overwhelmed. I found myself torn between my love for Sarah and my own moral convictions. The prospect of losing her was almost too much to bear, yet I couldn't bring myself to betray my own principles in order to keep her by my side. The choice before me felt impossible, each option laden with its own set of consequences and repercussions. As the deadline loomed closer, I found myself grappling with a myriad of conflicting emotions. On one hand, there was my deep love for Sarah, a bond that had weathered its fair share of storms over the years. On the other hand, there was my own sense of self-respect, my moral compass guiding me towards what I believed was right. The weight of the decision ahead of me felt like a heavy burden, one that I alone bore the responsibility of carrying. Would I be able to live with myself if I sacrificed my own values for the sake of keeping Sarah by my side? Or would I regret it for the rest of my days, haunted by the knowledge that I had betrayed my own principles? Update. Recently, there's been a significant gap between us, both emotionally and physically. It feels like we're miles apart, like there's this huge divide separating us from the closeness and intimacy we once had. I can feel the change most when it comes to our physical connection. We used to have this easy way of touching each other, of being close without even thinking about it. But now it's like there's this tension between us that wasn't there before. I find myself pulling away from my wife's touch, almost like I'm afraid of it. It's a strange feeling, one that I can't quite shake off. It's like her presence itself has become this uncomfortable weight, making it hard for us to connect like we used to. As an objective observer, I would like to offer some advice based on the situation described. 1. Know to Claire. While the notion of engaging in a threesome with someone you already trust, such as a friend, might seem appealing initially, it's essential to recognize the potential risks involved. Trusting someone in the context of a platonic relationship doesn't necessarily translate to trust in a sexual encounter. Introducing a friend into the dynamic can complicate existing relationships and lead to unforeseen emotional entanglements. The lines between friendship and sexual intimacy can become blurred, causing confusion and conflict within the relationships involved. Therefore, it's advisable for Ash to steer clear of involving Claire or any other close acquaintances in such arrangements to avoid potential fallout and protect the integrity of his marriage. 2. Saying no. Despite the discomfort associated with rejecting his wife's proposition, sometimes saying no is the wisest course of action. It's crucial for Ash to assert his boundaries firmly while maintaining open communication with his wife. By expressing his reservations and concerns, Ash can demonstrate his commitment to honesty and transparency in their relationship. How his wife reacts to his refusal can provide valuable insights into her respect for his boundaries and her willingness to prioritize their mutual well-being over her desires. It's essential for Ash to ensure that his refusal doesn't lead to resentment or distance between them, fostering an environment of understanding and respect, even in the face of difficult decisions. 3. Establish boundaries. Before considering any further steps, it's imperative for Ash and his wife to establish clear and unequivocal boundaries for any potential threesome. They must engage in open and honest discussions to outline their expectations, desires, and limitations regarding the proposed arrangement. Agreeing that any involvement with a third party would be a one-time occurrence unless both parties explicitly consent to future encounters is crucial to avoiding misunderstandings and conflicts. Establishing clear boundaries up front can help mitigate the risk of emotional turmoil and ensure that both partners feel respected and valued in the decision-making process. It's essential for Ash and his wife to approach these discussions with empathy, understanding, and a commitment to prioritizing their relationship's stability and well-being above all else. 4. Consider the risks. While the prospect of exploring sexual fantasies and desires may be enticing, it's essential for Ash to consider the potential risks and consequences associated with engaging in a threesome. Threesomes can introduce a myriad of complexities and challenges into a relationship, including jealousy, insecurity, and emotional distress. Ash should reflect on whether the potential rewards of such an encounter outweigh the potential risks to their marriage and emotional well-being. Trusting his instincts and prioritizing open communication with his wife can help Ash navigate this decision with clarity and confidence. Ultimately, it's vital for Ash to make a choice that aligns with his values, priorities, and long-term goals for their relationship, ensuring that their bond remains strong and resilient in the face of temptation and uncertainty. Finally, I want to extend my sincerest thanks to all of you who have taken the time to share your stories on Reddit. Please continue to journey with us, share your experiences, and together, let's create memorable moments.